I want to start off with a story about a young child in nursery school. A 4-year-old who is taking a nap is woken up, and the teacher, the Sunday school, the nursery worker, is all excited because the first band Gemini event is about to happen. I don't know if you were there back then, but if you read your history books, there were 3 orbits around the Earth is all we did with that, with a man in it, and down he flopped in the ocean. It's Gemini 3. It was Grissom and Young had 2 men in it. March 1965. At 2:42 in the afternoon, the flight lasted all of 4 hours and 52 minutes. By the way, you will see a lot of redundancy in Pete's presentation and mine because space has really influenced both of us. And that shouldn't surprise you because we are here on what coast? The Space Coast, right? Well, that 4-year-old was me. That's me at about that age. And I remember distinctly being woken from the nap and watching the black and white TV that was up in the corner as this rocket went off. And that was just really exciting to see. A number of years later, 1969, we were about to land on the moon. And I remember my father was all excited about it. He was an engineer as well. And we all watched on the television, listening to Walter Cronkite describe everything that happened. And I remember that there was an interview by Walter Cronkite, actually by his science editor at the time, whose name escapes me. I think I could see a beer challenger or something like that. And Hoagland? Richard. Thank you very much. An historian in the room. Thank you. It's Jeff, right? Good job. ORNL, the Oak Ridge National Labs. So by the way, that's where I grew up. I grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, was educated at Georgia Tech. I was wooed by Harris Corporation to come down here to Central Florida. I always figured my next stop would have to be Cuba, so I'm planning on stopping here because I love it here. Been here about 31 years. Came here in 1983 when I first graduated with my electrical engineering degree from Georgia Tech, which is the same year, I guess, Nancy and the Admiral had started this CEE organization. So Oak Ridge National Labs had developed some equipment and some methods for lunar receiving laboratories. So they set up a lab there and were transmitting data back, and they were measuring cosmic rays and other harmful exposure content that was there. And I remember a man was sitting there on CBS News who was from my hometown. And my dad said, I know that guy. I work with that guy. And they've been doing this stuff. And I actually found this press kit from that time that had some of the stuff in it that we had to throw there. It was my hometown, so I was very proud of it. It was exciting. And I remember the next day going to school, and a teacher mentioned it. Did you see so-and-so? You know, that's Billy's dad. He's in the 5th grade. He's ahead of you, but that's Billy's dad who's well known. Elementary school teachers inspire kids at a very, very important age. The former head of the math department that was here said that you're here, that you first got inspired around that time, 5th grade, 6th grade, was when that starts to happen. NASA has an explorerschools.nasa.gov webpage that has all kinds of useful information that's free to download, that has interactive activities with astronauts and scientists, that you can do things with your students through that portal. So take a look at that. It's something you shouldn't pass up. I remember getting to high school, taking a chemistry class with Mr. Puckett. Nobody liked Mr. Puckett, but I liked Mr. Puckett. He was a crew-cut military kind of guy and a very tough teacher. But he taught us something he proudly called Puckett squares. And I remember Puckett squares, and it helped me tremendously a few years later when I was in Georgia Tech, because it was a way of keeping your units straight. When you were doing mathematical equations, like you have 9.8 Newton is the same as kilogram meters per second squared, those are units. It allows you to cancel them all out and get the math right. So I thank Mr. Puckett at my Oak Ridge, Tennessee high school for teaching me that, so that anytime I have an equation, and in electrical engineering we have a lot of equations, I could keep those things balanced. And it was a way of double checking, did I get it right? Because if the units aren't right, the numbers probably aren't right. And it saves you when you get to the end. And that was very inspirational to me, a high school teacher that taught us that at grade 4. year later, 1977, I was dial twisting after school, and I saw on PBS a recording of a show called The Powers of 10. How many of you have ever seen the Power of 10 video? About half of you in the room. That's good. Charles and Ray Eames, very vanguard, entrepreneurial type of folks that designed furniture and were architects and did all these things. And they designed this system to try to communicate in just 9 minutes all this information about getting things about time relative to each other. It starts out at this picnic in a park by Lake Michigan, and there's this couple that's sitting there, and they decide that they're going to show you every 10 seconds, they're going to add a 0 to the distance that they are from the location. So it starts out at 1 meter, where you see the guy snoozing after a nice recam sandwich, and about 10 seconds later, you see the same view, and it's easing you out all the way through. At 10 meters, so this one's 10 seconds after the first one. Then 10 seconds later, you're 100 meters out. These tiny little speck here is that couple that's having that picnic and taking a nap. And then they throw in these little factoids to try to help you remember things. Because when you're at 100 meters, that's the distance that a man can run in about 10 seconds. So again, you see that power of 10, that adding another 0. Then at 10 more seconds, it goes out to a kilometer. You're now 1,000 meters out. It's the distance that a race car can travel in 10 seconds. I calculated it today just to make sure it's about 250 miles an hour. So it's not your interstate speed, but it is what a race car can do. It takes over 500, for example. Then you go out 10 more seconds. You're at 10 kilometers. That's the distance that a supersonic transport airplane, remember those? They don't fly into orbit. That's the distance they could travel in 10 seconds. 10 kilometers. Then you go out to 100 kilometers. It's the distance that a satellite orbiting the Earth travels in 10 seconds. And this is where you can start to see the lake and all of the land formations around it. Start to see some of the weather patterns that are going on. Like Michigan is there. Then you go out several orders of magnitude. I skipped a few on purpose. Because throughout the video, you start getting to these boring parts where there's not much change in what you're looking at. So as we were scanning out this way, we saw some clouds, we saw some of those kind of things, but it took us all the way to 10 megameters, 10 million meters, before you get the whole diameter of the Earth in the box. Then, 100 megameters, they mentioned an interesting fact. This is the speed of light. In 1 second, that's how much the light travels. And that's about half of the area of our lunar orbit of Earth. So that's the moon is orbiting us. Go out to, again, I skipped a few, 100 gigameters, or gigameters, depending on whether you're a science major or engineering. And you see the inner planets and the sun. Then you go out to 10,000 gigameters, and you see the entire solar system and all of the outer planets, including this weird one, Pluto, which goes in and out of the 8th or 9th position out there. Then you go out, and I skipped a whole bunch here, because for a long time it looks like nothing is changing. Because that's the way our universe is. It is filled with space that has nothing in it. The environment we live in, where there's lots of variety of things all around us, is the exception, not the rule. And so it takes going out to 100,000 light years before you can see the entire Milky Way galaxy that we call our home. And then I skipped some more to go out to 100 million light years, which was what they said at the time was the limit of our vision. 1977 was pre-Hubble, and we're in the Hubble era now, and I saw you had mentioned of the James Webb telescope, which is in design and the construction now to be launched. Do you know the launch date?
2017, I think is
2017. So we're 3 years away from yet another breakthrough, because now we don't talk about only being able to see 100 million light years. We see 2 orders of magnitude greater than that. The Hubble sees things on the order of 10 billion light years away, and has cataloged and identified approximately 100 billion galaxies that it can see. Amazing. Then they zoom back in 2 seconds every 10 that they did before to get you back home faster. They get back to that 1 meter. You remember the picnic? This guy, his hand is moved. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it's down in the center of the stage because they start moving inward. Every 10 seconds, they take you closer. At a tenth of a meter, you can see not even his entire hand. At a centimeter, you see the skin. Yeah, you don't want to do that to us, do you? And then go even deeper. At a tenth of a millimeter, you see the skin layers and blood vessels, and those things start going by. As you get down to 10 microns, you see red blood cells, and this is a picture of a lymphocyte. And then they zoom in tighter on the lymphocyte. At a tenth of a micron, you get down to an individual molecule, including the helix-shaped DNA molecule, which is the soft glue that defines exactly what we are, with that four-letter code that it has. Then they go down to 1 nanometer, and you see three hydrogen atoms connected to a carbon, a carbon atom. And they go down to a tenth of a nanometer, you start seeing the outer and inner shell electrons around that carbon atom. Down to 1/10 of a femtometer. Now notice I skipped a bunch of space again. Because from the electrons down to the protons and neutrons, there's a bunch of emptiness. Just like the Earth and the galaxy. The galaxy and the limit of what we understand about our universe. The same kind of construct. Vacillating between lots of activity and empty space. Lots of activity and empty space. Down to a tenth of a femtometer, which is where they said the lowest that they could go. They were looking at the effects of a single proton or neutron. And they pointed out that this 10 to the minus 16th meters compared to the other end of the spectrum with a total of 40 orders of magnitude. From the smallest thing you can see to the largest thing you can see. All of that in 9 minutes. I think I did it for you about 4.5. It's a little bit longer than it. Now today, we can go even smaller. We could be discussing bosons and fermions and quarks and leptons, etc., the things that are studied at CERN, which is the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or at the Heavy Ion Research Facility and the spallation neutron source, which brings us back full circle because the spallation neutron source is where?
Oak Ridge.
My hometown.
No way.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And my father was one of the designers of the Heavy Ion Research Facility in Oak, which is scheduled to be shut down next year because the spallation has kind of taken its place. These are particle accelerators that bust apart protons and neutrons and help us figure out what's the next layer down. Because when I grew up, protons and neutrons, those were called particles. They're not even called particles anymore. They're combinations of particles. 1981. So that was 1977. I was still in high school, teenager. Very inspirational film. I watched it over and over anytime I could see it on television. We didn't have a recorder back then. 4 years later, I'm working at the Oak Ridge National Labs. This is the Oak Ridge gaseous diffusion plant where my father had worked also. And while inside, we had that very first space shuttle launch, which he was a part of. And I remember we listened to it on a little radio about like that, because that's all we could have in the vault where I was. And I can remember when it launched, there was this one technician who was one of those do anything to get it done kind of guys. And he's from East Tennessee, he got a little bit of an accent. I remember when it launched and it was safe and it was in orbit and they got the main engine cut off. How long did it take to get a main engine cut off?
7.5 minutes.
7.5 minutes. Did you realize that? You were on that candle going. And then you're in orbit. Oh yeah. I'm sure it does, especially that first one. When you're the first one. And then you feel like you're at the top of the roller coaster for how many days? 2 weeks or something for some of these missions in zero gravity. What a crazy thing. But I can remember him looking at everybody in the room and saying, because this was the 80s, when we thought Japan was going to take over the world, tell those Japanese to put that in their pipe and smoke it. He was all excited about that. I guess we say that about the Chinese now. Things change over time. So, then, my wife, Susan, love of my life, Florida Institute of Technology. She also has a space science degree. Is yours in space systems or
Space systems.
Space systems. She got the space science side. And that's kind of the story of our lives. She is the more theoretical type. I am the more practical application type. So I probably would have done space systems. She did the space science degree. And her passion for deep space, every year this year I buy the Astronomical Society of the Pacific calendar for her, where they have the latest photographs from Hubble and some of the other places. And she hates, no offense, space junk. Don't see anything man-made in the picture.
Space junk,
Right?
Not a good
It's
thing.
got to be nebulas, deep space objects, black holes, white dwarfs, all of those kind of things. Planets are okay. That's the second best thing. Then I got the opportunity at Harris to work on the International Space Station. Back in the 80s, we called it Space Station Freedom, right? F-R-E-E-D-O-M. And I was working on an artificial intelligence program, because Harris is a communications company, and we didn't want to have every inhabitant of the space station to have to be a communications expert and know what TETRAS stood for, the Telemetry Data Relay Satellite System. And so we wanted to make it simple, so they could just say phone home, and it would connect them up. That was our goal. Now, as it turned out, Freedom did not end up being the name of the International Space Station. Back then it was the U.S. Space Station. A few budget cuts into it, we started calling it Space Station Fred, which is kind of a shorter version of it. But, and eventually we said, we don't have enough money to do this, let's invite the European Space Agency and other organizations to do that, and it became a nice global effort to pull all this together. So that was inspirational. I'm still thinking about what it would be like to live up there and be there. And another opportunity, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory hired Harris to analyze their plans for modernizing their communication system in the future. That was probably the most fun I've had on any program at Harris, because we had the opportunity to go out and interview all of these folks that were at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And I had the opportunity to go to Goldstone, California, out in the middle of the desert, and see this beautiful thing. Now, this may not be beautiful to you, but at Harris, we have pictures of antennas all over the place. This is the most sexy thing you can see. That's an engineering feat. But this one in particular is amazing because it is a 70-meter dish. That's a 21-story building out in the middle of the desert. When we were driving, it's actually not in Goldstone, it's out in the middle of the desert. Goldstone is the nearest one-stop light, full-of-haul lights town that's near there. And we start driving out there, and we see it on the horizon, and I think, oh, we're almost there. And we drive another hour to get to the thing as it rises up in the horizon to see that. See this little black thing right here? That is a high bay truck entrance to bring supplies in. There are offices all inside the base of this thing. It is one big antenna, a semi-religious experience. These were my Jet Propulsion Laboratory friends, these were my Harris friends, and myself out. We're about 200 yards away from the antenna to get it small enough to fit into the picture. And I got to climb on top of it. Not all of it, but Toronto Ironworks are the guys that made this thing. I mean, you had to hire, not a communications company, you had to hire an ironwork company to build this thing, because it's a mechanical engineer's.
The protein as they folded currently, where the atoms are and that kind of thing. We also added some visualizations that sort of draw the player's attention to areas where they can make improvements, such as, where there's empty space in the protein.
The gamer who put the finishing touch on the protein, identified only as Mimi, tells MSNBC more about what drives users to the game. The game is not only an interesting intellectual challenge, allowing you to use your problem-solving skills, feel for protein shapes, and whatever biochemical knowledge you have to obtain a solution to each puzzle, but it also provides a unique society of players driven by both individual and team rivalry with an overall purpose of improving the game and the results achieved. Reports say scientists had thrown the problem to as many computers as they could find, but still came up short. So how did gamers prevail where machines did not? A writer for NPR says it's about the humanity. Sometimes to get to the right answer, a drastic or seemingly illogical decision has to be made. But a computer trying to solve a problem will make an illogical decision that leads it down the wrong path because it can't always see that far ahead. Researchers hope the idea of crowdsourcing scientific puzzles takes off in other forms. But a writer for Gawker jokes, let's not take this partnership too far. Now the scientists want to see if full-day users can work on other disease-related problems, develop drugs, create biofuels, basically do their work for them. Then they can sit around their bedrooms playing video games all day long, drinking Mountain Dew out of their 2-liter bottles, and wearing nerdy black t-shirts over their scientist robes and get smart again. Researchers say many of the gamers who helped crack this code have no background in biology. For Newsy, I'm Laura Forrest. Multiple sources, the real.
Pretty interesting, huh? So try to think of some things like that that you can do. Big problems that take lots of people. To go beyond just your class. Put it over to the school. So here's the call. I want you to have the entrepreneurial spirit of the barbarians. Don't get wrapped up in the bureaucracy, the guidelines you've got. Don't let those things force you into making the wrong decision. Argue for what you know to be right. Have persistence. Bring passion, enthusiasm. Love people. Use things. Never give up on using the gifts that you've been entrusted with to bring out the most in those that you're teaching. Be that nursery worker who wakes up the 4-year-old to watch the launch. Be that local town crier who praises the work that's done in your own backyard. Share that book, that interview, that YouTube video. Put it out on Twitter, on Facebook, so that you share that enthusiasm and the things that you're interested in. Celebrate the accomplishments that happen with fervor so that all can participate in that. Live experiences with those you know. This is a photograph from the last hold before the last shuttle launch that took place 2.5 years ago. And these two guys got it. Flickr user Chris Bray and his father attended the very first shuttle launch, April 12th, 1981. And 33 years went by. They had never been to another shuttle launch. And they said, you know what, the last one's coming up. So they bookended the whole shuttle program so that they could come out here and retake the same photo on July 8th, 2001. That's the kind of thing that gets people interested. So cherish the opportunities. When you have the opportunity to participate in the technology and the science and the advancement of what's going on, be the barbarian in this, not to tear down the bureaucracy, but to challenge it so that it won't do the right thing. And be part of the inspiration, because more is taught, or caught rather, in those days that you have these children. This brief window of time, it is actually taught. They will learn